The night security guard's flashlight beam cut through the darkness of the old apartment building, illuminating peeling wallpaper and forgotten corners. Marcus had walked these halls for 3 years, checking every door, every window, every shadow. He thought he knew every inch of the building, but tonight, as rain hammered against the windows and thunder shook the walls, he would discover that some secrets hide in plain sight. Behind a bookshelf that shouldn't move, in a room that didn't exist on any blueprint, lay photographs that would turn his world upside down. What Marcus found that stormy Tuesday night would not only challenge everything he thought he knew about his job, but would also force him to make a choice that could save a life or destroy his own. Some mysteries are meant to stay buried. This one refused to. Marcus Thompson adjusted his security badge as he entered the Grandview Apartments at exactly 10 p.m. The old brick building had stood on Elm Street for nearly 60 years, and Marcus had been its night watchman for the past 3. He knew every creaky floorboard, every loose door handle, and every resident's late-night habits. Mrs. Bad. Rodriguez in 3B always left her television on until midnight. The college student in 2A came home around 1 a.m. with takeout food. Mr. Chen in 4C suffered from insomnia and often paced his apartment until dawn. Tonight felt different, though. The October storm outside was fierce, with wind that howled through the building's old windows and rain that pelted the glass like angry fingers. The power had flickered twice during Marcus's drive to work, and he could sense the building's uneasiness in the way the lights dimmed and brightened unpredictably. Marcus was 30, 4 years old, a former construction worker who had taken the security job after a back injury ended his career in building. The night shift paid well enough to support his small apartment across town and his weekend visits with his 8-year-old daughter, Emma. He preferred the solitude of night work. It gave him time to think, to read, and to avoid the complicated relationships that seemed to follow him during daylight hours. His routine was always the same. First, he checked the main entrance locks and tested the security cameras. The building had 6 floors with 4 apartments on each floor. The basement housed storage units and the building's mechanical systems. Marcus would start at the top floor and work his way down, checking each hallway, testing door handles, and noting anything unusual in his logbook. Tonight, as he climbed the stairs to begin his rounds on the 6th floor, the lights flickered again. This time, they stayed off for nearly 10 seconds before humming back to life. Marcus made a mental note to mention the electrical issue to the building manager in the morning. He pulled out his heavy-duty flashlight, just in case. The 6th floor was quiet as always. The 4 apartments were occupied by long-time residents who rarely caused trouble. Marcus tested each door handle gently, ensuring they were locked, and checked that the windows at the end of the hallway were secure. He moved methodically through floors 5, 4, and 3 without incident. It was on the 2nd floor that Marcus first noticed something odd. As he approached apartment 2D, he heard a sound that didn't fit the building's usual nighttime symphony. It was a soft scraping noise, like furniture being moved across a wooden floor. He stopped and listened carefully. The sound came again, definitely from inside 2D. Marcus knew that apartment 2D had been vacant for over a month. The previous tenant, an elderly man named Harold Finch, had moved to a nursing home in September. The apartment had been cleaned and was supposedly being prepared for new tenants, but Marcus had never seen any maintenance workers or potential renters during his shifts. He approached the door carefully and listened. The scraping sound continued, accompanied by what sounded like footsteps. Marcus felt his pulse quicken. In 3 years of night security work, he had dealt with break-ins before, but they were usually obvious affairs involving forced doors or broken windows. This was different. Marcus pulled out his radio and called the police dispatcher. He reported a possible break-in at 2314 Elm Street, apartment 2D, and requested backup. The dispatcher told him units were on their way but might be delayed due to the storm and several weather-related emergencies across the city. While waiting for the police, Marcus decided to investigate further. He had a master key to all apartments for emergencies, and this certainly qualified. He quietly unlocked the door to 2D and pushed it open slowly. The apartment was dark, but his flashlight revealed an empty living room with no furniture. The hardwood floors were dusty and showed no obvious footprints. Marcus stepped inside carefully, his flashlight beam sweeping across the room. The scraping sound had stopped, but he could hear something else now. A faint humming, almost like an electrical device running somewhere in the apartment. He moved through the living room toward the back bedrooms. The first bedroom was completely empty, as was the bathroom. But as Marcus approached the second bedroom, the humming grew louder. He pushed open the door and immediately noticed something strange. The room appeared to be shorter than it should be, based on the building's layout. Marcus had been in this apartment several times when Mr. Finch lived there, and he remembered the bedroom being longer. He walked to the far wall and examined it closely with his flashlight. The wallpaper pattern didn't quite match up correctly, and when he pressed against the wall, it felt different than the others. There was a slight give to it, as if it wasn't a solid wall but something else. Marcus ran his hands along the wall surface, looking for any kind of seam or opening. Near the corner, his fingers found a small irregularity in the wallpaper. When he pressed it, he heard a soft click, and a section of the wall swung inward like a hidden door. Behind the false wall was a narrow room that Marcus estimated to be about 8 feet long and 4 feet wide. The humming sound was much louder now, and his flashlight revealed the source: a small dehumidifier running in the corner. But what made Marcus's blood run cold were the walls of the hidden room. They were covered with photographs, hundreds of them, arranged in neat rows from floor to ceiling. At first, Marcus thought they might be family photos, or perhaps some kind of art collection. But as his flashlight beam moved across them, he realized they were all of the same subject: a young boy who appeared to be between 8 and 10 years old. The photos showed the boy in various locations around the neighborhood, playing in the park across the street, walking to school, sitting on the front steps of a house Marcus didn't recognize, getting into a car with a woman who was presumably his mother. Many of the photos appeared to have been taken with a telephoto lens from a distance, giving them a surveillance quality that made Marcus deeply uncomfortable. Marcus felt sick as he realized the implications of what he was seeing. Someone had been watching this child, photographing him secretly, and had created this hidden room to store the evidence. The dehumidifier suggested that whoever created this room intended to preserve these photos for a long time. He pulled out his cell phone to take pictures of the hidden room, but his hands were shaking so badly that the first few shots were blurry. He forced himself to calm down and document what he had found. The police would need evidence, and this room could disappear as quickly as he had found it. As Marcus photographed the walls of pictures, he noticed other details that made the situation even more disturbing. There were maps of the neighborhood with certain locations circled in red ink. A notebook sat on a small shelf, filled with what appeared to be schedules and observations written in neat handwriting. There were also several cameras, including ones with very powerful telephoto lenses. Marcus heard footsteps in the hallway outside the apartment and called out, "Police?" A voice responded that officers had arrived. Marcus carefully made his way back through the apartment to let them in, his mind racing with questions and concerns. When the 2 police officers entered the apartment, Marcus led them directly to the hidden room. Both officers were as shocked as Marcus had been. Officer Patricia Williams, a veteran with 15 years of experience, immediately called for detective support and crime scene technicians. "This is going to be a long night," she told Marcus. "We're going to need your complete statement about how you found this room. And we're going to need to wake up the building manager to find out everything they know about the previous tenant and this apartment." Detective Ray Morrison arrived within an hour, despite the continuing storm. He was a tall, thin man in his 40s who specialized in crimes against children. After examining the hidden room thoroughly, he told Marcus that this appeared to be the work of someone with an obsessive interest in the young boy in the photographs. "The level of organization here is concerning," Detective Morrison explained. "Whoever did this spent considerable time and effort watching this child. The question now is whether this person acted on their obsession or if they were content to just observe and collect photos." Marcus spent the next 3 hours at the police station giving his detailed statement. He described his normal routine, how he discovered the sounds in the apartment, and exactly how he found the hidden room. The detectives were particularly interested in his knowledge of the building's previous tenant, Harold Finch, and whether Marcus had ever noticed anything unusual about the man. Marcus realized he knew very little about Mr. Gray's Finch beyond their brief interactions during his security rounds. The man had been polite but private, often staying in his apartment for days at a time. Marcus had assumed he was just a typical elderly recluse, but now he wondered if there had been more sinister reasons for the man's secretive behavior. As dawn broke over the city and the storm finally began to subside, Marcus drove home, exhausted and deeply troubled. He had expected this to be just another routine night of security work. Instead, he had uncovered what appeared to be evidence of someone stalking a child. The images of those hundreds of photographs would stay with him for a long time. Marcus also realized that his discovery was just the beginning. The police would need to identify the child in the photographs, locate Harold Finch, and determine if there were other victims. Marcus's simple night security job had suddenly become much more complicated, and he had no idea how this discovery would change his life in the days and weeks to come. He lay awake in his bed that morning, unable to sleep despite his exhaustion. Every time he closed his eyes, He saw those walls covered with photos of the young boy. Marcus found himself thinking about his own daughter Emma and how vulnerable children could be to people with bad intentions. The hidden room had revealed a darkness that Marcus had never imagined could exist so close to his daily life. Marcus woke up at 3 p.m. the next day to find 12 missed calls on his phone. 7 were from Detective Morrison, 3 from his building manager Janet Walsh, and 2 from numbers he didn't recognize. The discovery of the hidden room had set in motion an investigation that was moving much faster than Marcus had expected. He called Detective Morrison first. The detective's voice sounded tired but urgent. "Marcus, we need you to come to the station as soon as possible. We've identified the boy in the photographs, and the situation is more complicated than we initially thought." At the police station, Detective Morrison led Marcus to a conference room where several other investigators had assembled. There were photographs spread across a large table, maps pinned to walls, and whiteboards covered with notes and timelines. Marcus felt overwhelmed by the scope of what his discovery had unleashed. "The child in the photographs is 10-year-old David Chen," Detective Morrison began. "He's the son of Michael Chen, who lives in apartment 4C of your building. The same Michael Chen you mentioned in your statement as the insomniac who paces his apartment at night." Marcus felt his stomach drop. David Chen lived in the same building where the photos had been taken. This meant Harold Finch had been photographing a child who lived just 2 floors above him. The proximity made everything feel more sinister and immediate. Detective Lisa Rodriguez, a specialist in child protection cases, showed Marcus additional evidence they had found in the hidden room. "We discovered a detailed journal that documents this child's daily routines going back over 2 years. School schedule, after-school activities, family outings, even notes about when his father worked late and when the boy would be home alone with just his mother." The journal entries were written in the same neat handwriting Marcus had noticed the night before. They read like surveillance reports, noting times, locations, and detailed observations about David's behavior and activities. Some entries included comments about the boy's appearance and clothing that made Marcus deeply uncomfortable. "We also found evidence that Harold Finch had been taking these photographs for much longer than we initially thought," Detective Morrison continued. "Some of the pictures showed David as young as 6 years old. This suggests Finch began his surveillance when the Chen family first moved into the building 4 years ago. The police had been trying to locate Harold Finch since early morning, but they were encountering obstacles. The nursing home where he had supposedly moved claimed they had no resident by that name. The address he had provided to the building management turned out to be fake. His social security number led to a man who had died in Florida 3 years earlier. Harold Finch appears to be an alias," Detective Rodriguez explained. "We're working with federal authorities now because this level of identity deception suggests someone with experience evading law enforcement. We're also concerned that there may be other victims besides David Chen." Marcus learned that the police had already spoken with David's parents that morning. Michael Chen was shocked and horrified to learn that someone in his own building had been stalking his son for years. David's mother, Susan, had become hysterical when shown some of the photographs, recognizing locations where she had thought her son was safe and unobserved. "The family is understandably terrified," Detective Morrison said. "They're staying with relatives until we can determine if Harold Finch, or whatever his real name is, poses an immediate threat. We've also placed security at David's school as a precaution." The investigation team showed Marcus evidence that suggested Harold Finch's obsession with David had been escalating in recent months. The most recent journal entries included detailed fantasies about approaching the boy and elaborate plans for potential encounters. There were maps showing routes between David's school and home, with notes about times when the boy walked alone. "This is the pattern we often see in these cases," Detective Rodriguez explained. "The surveillance and fantasy phase can continue for years, but eventually many perpetrators feel compelled to act on their obsessions. Based on the recent journal entries, we believe Harold Finch was moving toward that phase when he suddenly left the apartment." Marcus asked why Finch would have abandoned his carefully constructed surveillance operation so abruptly. Detective Morrison had a theory about that. "We think something spooked him. Maybe he thought someone was getting suspicious, or perhaps he had a close call that made him fear discovery." The hidden room was very sophisticated, but it was also risky. Any maintenance work or thorough apartment inspection could have revealed it. The police had found other disturbing evidence in Finch's apartment beyond the hidden room. His regular living spaces contained additional cameras, police scanners, and detailed maps of the entire neighborhood. There were also financial records showing that Finch had been paying his rent months in advance and had accumulated large amounts of cash, suggesting he was prepared to leave quickly if necessary. "We've also discovered that Finch had been using the building's internet connection to research topics related to child abduction and identity changes," Detective Rodriguez said. His online activity shows he was planning something beyond just surveillance. Marcus felt increasingly disturbed by each new detail. He had been working in the same building as this dangerous man for 3 years, walking past his apartment every night, completely unaware of what was happening just behind the walls. The thought that he might have unknowingly facilitated Finch's activities by providing a sense of security made Marcus feel sick. The police asked Marcus to continue his normal work routine at the Grandview apartments, but now, as part of their investigation, they wanted him to watch for any signs that Finch might return or attempt to contact anyone in the building. They also needed Marcus to help them understand the building's patterns and routines, since he knew them better than anyone. Detective Morrison gave Marcus a direct phone number and told him to call immediately if he noticed anything unusual. No matter how minor it might seem, people like Harold Finch often have compulsive behaviors, the detective explained. Even though he's fled, there's a chance he might not be able to stay away from his obsession completely. That evening, Marcus returned to work at the Grandview apartments with a completely different perspective.
Every shadow seemed potentially threatening, and every sound made him alert and suspicious.
The building manager, Janet Walsh, met him at the entrance looking shaken and exhausted. "I can't believe this was happening right under our noses," Janet said. "I've been managing this building for 8 years, and I pride myself on knowing what goes on here. How could I have missed something like this?" Janet told Marcus that she had spent the entire day dealing with police investigators, frightened residents, and reporters who had somehow learned about the discovery. Several tenants were talking about moving out, worried that their own apartments might contain hidden surveillance equipment or that other dangerous people might be living in the building. "The Chen family was one of our best tenant families," Janet continued. "They paid their rent on time, never caused problems, and David was such a sweet kid. I feel like I failed to protect them. If you hadn't found that room, who knows what might have happened to that boy." As Marcus began his rounds that night, he found himself looking at the building with completely new eyes. He examined walls more carefully, listening for sounds that might indicate hidden rooms or surveillance equipment. He paid closer attention to the apartments of tenants he had previously considered harmless and routine. When Marcus reached the 4th floor and passed the Chen family's apartment, he felt a deep sadness seeing their door with police tape across it. The apartment was empty now, but just days earlier it had been home to a family that felt safe and secure in their daily routines. That security had been an illusion. Shattered by the discovery of Harold Finch's hidden room 2 floors below, Marcus spent extra time checking the locks and windows on the 4th floor, making sure there were no signs that anyone had tried to return to the building. The police had changed the locks on Harold Finch's apartment and were monitoring it for any activity, but Marcus felt responsible for providing an additional layer of security. As the night progressed, Marcus found himself thinking about all the other children in the neighborhood. David Chen had been targeted simply because he lived in the same building as his stalker. But there were dozens of other children who walked the same streets, played in the same parks, and attended the same school. How many other predators might be watching them? Marcus also thought about his own daughter, Emma. She lived across town with his ex-wife, but Marcus realized he had been naive about the potential dangers that could surround any child. The discovery of Harold Finch's surveillance operation had opened his eyes to threats he had never seriously considered before. Around 2 a.m., Marcus was checking the basement when he noticed something that made him stop. Near the storage area, there was a small access panel that he had never paid attention to before. Tonight, it looked slightly different. The screws holding it in place appeared newer and cleaner than the surrounding metal. Marcus called Detective Morrison immediately. Within an hour, police technicians were examining the access panel. Behind it, they found additional surveillance equipment that Harold Finch had apparently installed to monitor the building's common areas. Hidden cameras had been recording the lobby, hallways, and even the mailbox area where residents collected their mail. "This man had turned your entire building into a surveillance operation," Detective Rodriguez told Marcus. "He wasn't just watching David Chen, he was monitoring everyone who lived here, probably looking for patterns and opportunities." The discovery of the additional surveillance equipment meant the investigation would be expanding again. Police would need to review months of recorded footage to understand the full scope of Harold Finch's activities and to look for evidence that might help them track down his current location. Marcus left work that morning feeling even more disturbed than he had the day before. What had started as the discovery of one hidden room was revealing a complex and sophisticated operation that had turned his workplace into a hunting ground. He wondered how many other buildings, in how many other cities, might contain similar hidden surveillance operations that no one had discovered yet. As he drove home, Marcus made a decision. He was going to do everything in his power to help the police catch Harold Finch. The investigation had become personal for him, not just because he had made the initial discovery, but because he now understood how vulnerable everyone's sense of security could be. If people like Harold Finch could operate undetected for years in plain sight, then no one was truly safe unless people like Marcus remained vigilant and alert. 2 weeks after the discovery, Marcus had settled into an uncomfortable routine of living between two worlds. During his day hours, he was constantly in contact with law enforcement, providing details about building operations and helping investigators understand Harold Finch's methods. At night, he continued his security work, but now as an active participant in the ongoing manhunt for one of the most dangerous predators the local police had ever encountered. Detective Morrison called Marcus early one Tuesday afternoon with urgent news. "We've had a breakthrough in the Finch case. A woman in Detroit contacted the FBI after seeing his photo on a nationwide alert. She believes Harold Finch is actually Robert Kellerman, a man who was investigated for similar activities in Michigan 15 years ago, but was never prosecuted due to lack of evidence." The FBI's involvement had transformed the investigation from a local case into a federal operation. Robert Kellerman, if that was indeed Harold Finch's real identity, had a history that suggested David Chen was not his first target. Police in 3 different states were now reviewing cold cases involving missing children and unexplained surveillance activities. The Detroit woman, Margaret Foster, lived in the same apartment building as Kellerman in 2009. Detective Morrison explained to Marcus during their meeting that afternoon. She says he showed unusual interest in her 7-year-old grandson, who visited regularly. When she started asking questions about Kellerman's behavior, he disappeared suddenly, leaving behind a paid-up lease and most of his belongings. The FBI had also discovered that Robert Kellerman had been using multiple identities over the past 2 decades. Financial records showed a pattern of short-term residences in various cities, always in buildings or neighborhoods with high concentrations of families with young children. Each time he would establish a false identity, find work that provided minimal supervision, and begin his surveillance activities.
What makes this case particularly dangerous, FBI agent Sarah Chen explained to Marcus, is that Kellerman has gotten much more sophisticated over the years.
The Harold Finch identity was his most elaborate yet, and the surveillance operation you discovered was far more advanced than anything we've seen in his previous locations.
The FBI's behavioral analysts had developed a profile of Kellerman that painted a picture of an extremely patient and methodical predator. He typically spent months or even years studying potential victims before taking any direct action. His previous cases suggested that he preferred children between the ages of 8 and 12, particularly boys who lived in single-parent homes or families where the parents worked irregular hours. Marcus learned that David Chen fit Kellerman's victim profile perfectly. David's father, Michael, worked as a restaurant manager and often didn't come home until late at night. His mother, Susan, worked part-time at a local clinic and attended evening classes 3 nights a week. This left David alone, or with minimal supervision for several hours each day, exactly the kind of vulnerability that Kellerman looked for. The investigation team showed Marcus evidence that Kellerman had been preparing to approach David directly. In addition to the surveillance photos and detailed schedules, investigators had found props and materials that suggested Kellerman was planning to pose as a maintenance worker or delivery person to gain access to the Chen family's apartment. The timeline suggests you discovered his operation just weeks or possibly days before he intended to act, Agent Chen told Marcus. Your routine security check may have saved David Chen's life. This knowledge was both gratifying and terrifying for Marcus. He was proud that his diligence had protected a child, but the closeness of the timing made him realize how easily the situation could have had a tragic outcome. If he had been less thorough that stormy night, or if the power outage hadn't prompted him to investigate the unusual sounds, Kellerman might have successfully abducted David. The FBI was now coordinating with law enforcement agencies across the country, sharing Kellerman's photo and known aliases with police departments, schools, and child protection organizations. They were also working with social media companies and internet service providers to monitor for any online activity that might reveal his current location. Meanwhile, Marcus's role in the investigation was evolving. The FBI asked him to help them understand how someone like Kellerman could operate undetected for so long in a residential building. They wanted to use Marcus's insights to develop training materials for security personnel and building managers nationwide. You represent the first line of defense in many of these cases, Agent Chen explained. Most predators rely on the assumption that security personnel and building staff will stick to routine procedures and not investigate unusual activities. Your willingness to investigate something that seemed out of place made all the difference. Marcus began working with the FBI to create a guide for security personnel about warning signs that might indicate predatory behavior in residential buildings. The guide included information about surveillance equipment, unusual tenant behavior, and the importance of reporting minor anomalies that might seem insignificant individually, but could be part of a larger pattern. During this process, Marcus learned about other cases where security guards and building staff had noticed suspicious activities but had not reported them because they seemed too minor to warrant attention. In several cases, these unreported observations might have led to earlier intervention if they had been investigated properly. The Chen family remained in protective custody, living with relatives in another part of the city. Marcus met with David's parents to help them understand what the investigation had revealed about Kellerman's activities. The meeting was emotionally difficult for everyone involved. I keep thinking about all the times David walked to school alone, Susan Chen said through tears. All the times I thought he was safe playing in the park across the street. How could I have been so naive about the dangers around us? Michael Chen was struggling with guilt about the family's decision to live in the Grandview apartments. If I'd been more involved, if I'd been home more often, maybe I would have noticed something was wrong. Maybe I would have seen this man watching my son. Marcus tried to reassure both parents that they had done nothing wrong and that Kellerman's operation was designed specifically to avoid detection. This man was a professional predator who had been perfecting his methods for decades, Marcus told them. Even trained law enforcement officers didn't recognize the signs of what he was doing. You couldn't have known. The conversation with David's parents reinforced Marcus's determination to help catch Kellerman. He began spending his off hours researching similar cases and learning about predator behavior patterns. He wanted to become better at recognizing threats and protecting the communities where he worked. 3 weeks into the investigation, Marcus was working his usual night shift when he noticed something that made his heart race. A man was standing across the street from the Grandview apartments, partially hidden in the shadows but clearly watching the building. Marcus observed him for several minutes through the lobby windows, noting that the man seemed particularly interested in the fourth-floor windows where the Chen family had lived. Ball. Marcus immediately called the FBI hotline and reported the suspicious person. Within minutes, unmarked police cars were converging on the location. But when officers approached the area where Marcus had seen the man, he was gone. A search of the immediate neighborhood revealed no trace of anyone matching the description Marcus had provided. It's possible this was Kellerman conducting reconnaissance, Agent Chen told Marcus the next day. Predators often have compulsive behaviors that draw them back to locations associated with their obsessions, even when they know it's dangerous. The FBI decided to increase surveillance around the Grandview apartments and several other locations connected to the case. They also asked Marcus to install additional security cameras in the building's exterior areas and to maintain detailed logs of anyone he saw in the vicinity who seemed to be watching the building. Marcus found himself becoming increasingly paranoid and hypervigilant during his work shifts. Every person on the street became a potential threat, and every unusual sound or movement required investigation. The psychological toll of living in constant alertness was beginning to affect his sleep and his relationships with friends and family. His ex-wife noticed the changes during his weekend visits with Emma. "You seem different lately," she told him. "More anxious and distracted. Is everything okay with your job?" Marcus had been avoiding telling his ex-wife about the Kellerman case because he didn't want to frighten her or make her worry about Emma's safety. But the stress of keeping the secret was becoming difficult to manage. He finally decided to share some general information about the investigation without revealing the most disturbing details. "I discovered something at work that led to a police investigation," Marcus explained. "It involved someone who was potentially dangerous to children in the neighborhood. The case is ongoing, and I'm helping the police with their investigation." His ex-wife was immediately concerned and wanted to know more details. Marcus assured her that the immediate danger had passed and that law enforcement was taking appropriate precautions, but he could see that she was now worried about Emma's safety in ways she hadn't been before. This conversation made Marcus realize that the Kellerman case was affecting not just him, but everyone around him. The knowledge that such dangerous people could operate undetected in ordinary communities was creating a ripple effect of fear and suspicion that extended far beyond the immediate victims. As Marcus continued his investigation cooperation with the FBI, he began to understand that catching Kellerman was only part of a much larger problem. There were potentially hundreds of similar predators operating in cities across the country, using increasingly sophisticated methods to identify and stalk victims while avoiding detection by law enforcement. The hidden room in apartment 2D had revealed not just one man's dangerous obsession, but a window into a dark world that most people never knew existed. Marcus was now part of the effort to shine light into that darkness, but he was also learning that the fight against predators like Robert Kellerman would be long and difficult, requiring vigilance and cooperation from ordinary citizens who were willing to look beyond their normal routines and question things that seemed out of place. The investigation was far from over, but Marcus knew that his life had been permanently changed by what he had discovered that stormy night. He was no longer just a security guard doing routine checks. He had become a guardian, someone who understood the importance of paying attention to details that others might ignore, and someone who was committed to protecting the vulnerable members of his community from threats they might never see coming. 6 weeks after the discovery of the hidden room, Marcus received a phone call that would change everything. It was 6 a.m. on a Saturday morning, and Agent Sarah Chen's voice was tense with urgency. "Marcus, we've located Kellerman. He's in Cleveland, and he's already begun surveillance activities on a new target. We need you to fly there immediately to help with the identification and arrest operation." The FBI had traced Robert Kellerman to a small apartment building in Cleveland's Tremont neighborhood through a combination of financial tracking and facial recognition technology. Security cameras at a local grocery store had captured images of a man matching Kellerman's description, purchasing supplies that matched his previous surveillance operations. "More importantly," Agent Chen continued, "we believe he's already identified a new victim. Local police have found evidence of someone conducting surveillance on an 8-year-old boy named Tommy Martinez. The pattern is identical to what he was doing with David Chen." Marcus was on a plane to Cleveland within hours. During the flight, FBI agents briefed him on what they had discovered about Kellerman's new operation. He was using the identity William Hayes and had rented a small apartment across the street from an elementary school. The apartment's windows provided a direct view of the school playground and the routes children used to walk home. The Cleveland police found hidden cameras positioned to monitor the Martinez family's home, Agent Chen explained as their plane descended into Cleveland. "Tommy Martinez lives with his single mother, who works double shifts as a nurse. The boy is often alone after school for 3 to 4 hours each day." The similarities to David Chen's situation were striking and disturbing. Kellerman had found another vulnerable child in circumstances that matched his preferred victim profile. The FBI's behavioral analysts believed that Kellerman's compulsive behavior patterns made it impossible for him to stop his predatory activities, even though he knew law enforcement was actively hunting him. When Marcus arrived at the Cleveland police station, he was introduced to Detective Maria Santos, who had been leading the local investigation. Detective Santos showed Marcus surveillance photos that Cleveland police had taken of Kellerman over the past several days. "He's been watching the Martinez home for at least 2 weeks, Detective Santos explained. "We've documented him following Tommy to school, photographing him at the playground, and conducting reconnaissance of the family's apartment building. Based on the evidence patterns you helped us identify in the David Chen case, we believe Kellerman is preparing to make direct contact with Tommy very soon." The Cleveland operation involved more than 20 law enforcement officers from multiple agencies, FBI agents, local police detectives, child protection specialists, and technical surveillance teams had coordinated to create a comprehensive plan for arresting Kellerman while ensuring Tommy Martinez's safety. Marcus's role was to help the arrest team understand Kellerman's behavioral patterns and to identify any surveillance methods or hiding places they might have overlooked. His experience discovering the hidden room in apartment 2D had made him valuable for recognizing the subtle signs of Kellerman's operations that other investigators might miss. The arrest plan was scheduled for the following Tuesday morning. Intelligence suggested that Kellerman typically conducted his most intensive surveillance of Tommy Martinez on Tuesday mornings when the boy's mother worked an early shift at the hospital. The FBI wanted to catch Kellerman in the act of stalking his intended victim, providing clear evidence of his predatory intent. Marcus spent Monday conducting reconnaissance of Kellerman's apartment building and the surrounding neighborhood. He identified several locations where Kellerman had likely positioned surveillance equipment, including fire escape platforms with clear views of Tommy's school route and a storage shed behind the Martinez family's building. "This man's planning is incredibly detailed," Marcus told the FBI team during their final briefing Monday night. "Every location I've examined shows evidence of long-term surveillance preparation. He's been mapping escape routes, identifying security blind spots, and learning the schedules of everyone in Tommy's family network." On Tuesday morning, Marcus positioned himself with the arrest team in an unmarked surveillance van across from Kellerman's apartment building. At 7:15 a.m., they observed Kellerman leaving his apartment carrying a camera with a long telephoto lens. He walked directly to a position that provided a clear view of the elementary school entrance where Tommy Martinez would arrive for classes. Marcus watched through binoculars as Kellerman began photographing Tommy as the boy walked to school. The scene was almost identical to what must have happened hundreds of times outside the Grandview apartments in Marcus's city. The same patient stalking, the same methodical documentation, the same predatory focus on a vulnerable child. "This is it," Agent Chen said into her radio. "All units move in for arrest." The arrest happened quickly, but not without drama. Kellerman saw the approaching officers and attempted to run, discarding his camera equipment and heading toward a wooded area behind the school. Marcus, despite not being an active law enforcement officer, found himself pursuing Kellerman alongside the FBI agents. "Stop running, Kellerman," Marcus shouted as they chased the fugitive through the trees. "We know who you are and what you've been doing." Kellerman was tackled by 2 FBI agents near a small creek about 200 yards from the school. As they handcuffed him, Marcus felt an overwhelming sense of relief and closure. The man who had terrorized David Chen and his family, who had turned Marcus's workplace into a hunting ground, was finally in custody. During the arrest processing, Kellerman maintained his William Hayes identity and claimed he was just an amateur photographer interested in documenting neighborhood life. However, when FBI agents searched his Cleveland apartment, they found evidence that demolished his denials. The apartment contained detailed surveillance records for Tommy Martinez going back 3 weeks, including the boy's daily schedules, family routines, and multiple reconnaissance maps. There were also materials suggesting Kellerman was preparing to approach Tommy directly, including a fake utility company uniform and identification badges. More disturbing, investigators found evidence that Tommy Martinez was not Kellerman's only target in Cleveland. There were surveillance photographs of at least 3 other children in the neighborhood, suggesting that Kellerman was selecting from multiple potential victims based on their vulnerability and accessibility. This man represents one of the most methodical and dangerous predators we've encountered. FBI agent Chen told reporters during a press conference announcing Kellerman's arrest. The investigation that began with a security guard's routine check in another state has prevented what could have been multiple child abductions. Marcus found himself at the center of media attention following Kellerman's arrest. News outlets wanted to interview the security guard, whose vigilance had uncovered a multi-state child predator operation. Marcus was uncomfortable with the publicity but agreed to several interviews because he wanted to encourage other security personnel to remain alert for suspicious activities. "I was just doing my job the way I thought it should be done," Marcus told a national television reporter. "But this case taught me that ordinary people in ordinary jobs can make a huge difference in protecting children if they pay attention to things that seem out of place." The FBI's investigation into Kellerman's activities expanded significantly after his arrest. Forensic analysis of his computers and storage devices revealed evidence connecting him to suspicious activities in at least 7 different cities over the past 15 years. Several cold cases involving missing children were being reopened based on location correlations with Kellerman's known residences. David Chen's family was finally able to return to their normal lives after Kellerman's arrest. Marcus met with them one final time to share the news and to see how they were adjusting to the end of their nightmare. "We can never thank you enough for what you did," Michael Chen told Marcus during their meeting. "David is starting to sleep through the night again, and Susan is beginning to feel safe when he plays outside. Your attention to detail saved our son's life." Susan Chen had started volunteering with a local organization that educated parents about predator awareness and child safety. "I want to make sure other families don't have to experience what we went through," she explained. "If sharing our story helps even one parent recognize warning signs, then something positive will have come from this terrible situation." Marcus returned to his security job at the Grandview apartments, but his approach to the work had been permanently transformed. He now conducted his rounds with a much deeper understanding of the potential threats that could exist in any residential building. His routine checks were more thorough, and he maintained detailed logs of unusual activities that might seem insignificant to others. The building management had installed additional security measures based on the FBI's recommendations, including improved lighting in common areas and upgraded locks on storage and utility spaces where surveillance equipment might be hidden. Several other apartment buildings in the city had implemented similar security improvements after learning about the Kellerman case. Marcus also began working with local law enforcement agencies to train other security personnel about recognizing signs of predatory behavior. His experience had demonstrated that security guards and building staff were often in unique positions to observe suspicious activities that others might miss. Security work isn't just about checking locks and watching for obvious crimes, Marcus would tell the groups he trained. Sometimes the most important thing you can do is notice when something doesn't seem right, even if you can't explain exactly what's bothering you about it. The Kellerman case had lasting effects on Marcus's personal life as well. His relationship with his daughter Emma had deepened because the investigation had made him more aware of how precious and vulnerable children could be. He spent more time with her during his weekend visits and was more involved in her school and social activities. His ex-wife noticed the changes in Marcus's parenting approach. "You seem more present now," she told him. "More engaged with Emma's life and more aware of what's happening in her world. Whatever happened with that police investigation, it seems to have made you a better father." Marcus had also developed new relationships with law enforcement officers and child protection advocates who continued to consult with him on cases involving residential surveillance and predatory behavior. His insights were helping investigators understand how determined predators could exploit the ordinary routines and assumptions of apartment building life. Robert Kellerman was eventually sentenced to life in prison without parole after pleading guilty to multiple charges related to child stalking and attempted kidnapping. The evidence Marcus had helped discover was crucial in demonstrating the scope and persistence of Kellerman's predatory activities over many years and multiple jurisdictions. During the sentencing hearing, Marcus was recognized by the judge for his role in preventing what could have been tragic crimes against children. "Mr. Thompson's vigilance and dedication to his responsibilities represent the best of what we hope to see in members of our community," the judge said. "His actions remind us that protecting our most vulnerable citizens requires all of us to remain alert and engaged." As Marcus reflected on the case months later, he realized that the discovery of the hidden room had changed more than just his approach to security work. It had transformed his understanding of his role in the community and his responsibility to protect others, especially children, who might be targeted by predators operating in plain sight. The stormy night that had led him to investigate unusual sounds in apartment 2D had revealed that ordinary vigilance could have extraordinary consequences. Marcus's routine security check had not only saved David Chen from a dangerous predator, but it also protected Tommy Martinez and potentially many other children from similar threats. Marcus continued working the night shift at the Grandview Apartments, but he now understood that his job was about much more than checking locks and testing alarms. He was part of a network of ordinary citizens whose attention to detail and willingness to investigate suspicious activities formed an essential defense against those who would harm the innocent and vulnerable members of society. The hidden room was gone, demolished during the building's renovation, after Kellerman's arrest, but the lessons Marcus had learned from discovering it continued to guide his work and his life, reminding him daily that paying attention to things that seem out of place can sometimes make all the difference between safety and tragedy.